Thank you, choir. I invite you to stand for the gospel. The Holy Gospel according to St. Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. When evening had come, Jesus said to the disciples, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with them. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was such a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise you, Lord Christ. Please be seated. Well, as many of you know, our family took a trip to Florida recently, and we had the opportunity to visit some of my old haunts from 1999, way back then, when I was a young adult volunteer working in a church in North Miami Beach. What an adventure it was back then, a Midwest girl moving to Miami for a year. It was definitely a way to broaden my horizons, and I will never be the same. In fact, my faith deepened, my understanding of my vocation strengthened, and my knowledge and appreciation of cultures and traditions expanded. But I can't lie. It was scary. 7 young adults from all over the country coming together to live in one little house for 12 months. What an undertaking. By the end of the 12 months, there were only 4 of us left. 2 fell in love, ran off and got married, and now have 5 kids. Happily married, though. And one went home after to be with his mom after his dad died of a sudden heart attack. There were many times when, like the disciples in the boat, a great windstorm would arise in our little house, and there would be conflict, and there would be chaos, and there would be fear. None of us had any knowledge of how to deal with this, and even though we had a director who we could call, she would never seem to come in and solve our problems. In fact, even when Hurricane Irene showed up, like a real storm, like physical storm, no one swooped in to save the day. We had to figure it out on our own, or so we thought. I guess we all kind of wondered, why does it seem like she doesn't care? In other words, why is she sleeping on the job? I wonder if the disciples kind of felt the same about Jesus when he was sound asleep during this terrible storm. Doesn't he care that their boat is about to sink and they were all about to die? I think it's interesting that their first assumption is that Jesus doesn't care. And I think it's because fear has overtaken them. In the midst of the storm and the chaos and the fear, they cannot think clearly. And they come to irrational conclusions. And then after the storm has calmed, he asks them, "Why are you afraid?" In other words, why did you let fear get the best of you? Now, don't get me wrong, fear can be beneficial when it signals our bodies to respond to danger and keep us safe. However, when fear starts to take over your life, you can have serious health consequences. The University of Minnesota Earl E. Bakken Center names a few health consequences of constant fear, such as it can affect your physical health and weaken your immune system and can lead to accelerated aging and even premature death. It can impair formation of long-term memories and cause damage to certain parts of the brain. To someone in chronic fear, the world looks scary, and their memories confirm that. Not only that, fear can interrupt processes in our brains that allow us to regulate emotion, read nonverbal cues and other information presented to us, reflect before acting, and act ethically. This impacts our thinking, our decision-making in negative ways, leaving us susceptible to intense emotions and impulsive reactions. All of these effects can leave us unable to act appropriately. Other consequences of long-term fear include fatigue, clinical depression, and PTSD. Obviously, constant fear is not a good thing. In fact, one thing not exactly mentioned by the University of Minnesota is the fact that fear can affect our relationship with others, including our relationship with Jesus. When we get that phone call about our own health or our loved one's illness, or we are experiencing financial strain, or we're in the middle of a natural disaster, or when we worry about how the world is going to be for our kids and our grandkids, we tend to turn to fear. But what about turning to Jesus before the fear starts creeping in? What if that was our first instinct? What if we didn't just assume that Jesus is asleep and doesn't care? What if we believed that Jesus would hear us and would understand? I know when I get bad news about something, I often turn to Google to gather information about the subject, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but what if I immediately turn to prayer? I know some people turn to blame. They think, if only so-and-so didn't do this or that, this wouldn't have happened. Or some people turn to anything that will numb the fear, or some people become immobilized and despondent. Some immediately want to fix the problem, want to save the day. But before we start coming to our own conclusions, whether they are rational or not, what if we turned to Jesus? What if we turned to prayer? I know it's probably not most people's natural instinct to immediately turn to prayer when they face fear, but let's face it, who is the most powerful? God. Who is the creator of the universe? God. Who is the most compassionate and loving of all? God. Who is everywhere at all times? God. Who is all-knowing? God. So why wouldn't we turn to God? In our women's Bible study a few months ago, we focused on a book by Max Lucado called Anxious for Nothing. One of the things that Max recommends when you feel afraid or anxious is to think about the acronym CALM, C-A-L-M. C standing for celebrate God's goodness. Consider, how will you express joy for God's goodness today? A, ask God for help. Let your requests be made known to God, whether it be in the form of a silent prayer or a journal, or maybe talking with a trusted friend. L, leave your concerns with God. Thank God for listening and always being there to hear your concerns. M, meditate on good things. Don't dwell on the negative things. Look for the positive in the world. Max suggests that when you do this, you experience freedom. You experience joy, clarity, physical renewal, and contentment. I don't know about you, but to me, this sounds a lot better than the effects of constant, long-term fear. And even though we will have fear in our lives, let us remember that it doesn't have to win the day. God will win the day, and the storm will pass. Amen.